It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Coming up, an emergency response as two ships collide 10 miles off the Yorkshire coast. One person is still missing after the collision this morning in the North Sea. Dramatic pictures showing both vessels on fire. 36 crew members across both ships were rescued. Questions now being asked of how the incident could have happened, with a container ship seemingly running into a stationary tanker, which was being chartered by the US military. And fears too tonight over the environmental impact. The tanker spilling jet fuel into the sea from its ruptured cargo hold, and the container ship was carrying sodium cyanide, a highly toxic chemical. As local officials call on the government to set out a rapid response, wildlife charities are making their own plans, meeting tonight to coordinate their efforts. We'll have the latest developments for you and expert analysis here on the UK Tonight. Well, we start with that developing story, the urgent response to the collision between two ships in the North Sea earlier today, one of them carrying jet fuel, the other carrying a highly toxic chemical. Marine traffic websites show oil tanker the Stena Immaculate being struck by the container ship Solong around 10 miles off the East Yorkshire coast earlier today, causing fires on board both vessels. Now, there were 37 crew members across both ships, and the owner of the Solong said that tonight one of them is still missing, and there are growing fears about the environmental impact of the collision. Our national correspondent Tom Parmenter has our first report.
The collision sparked explosions and fireballs. It was a low-speed crash with extraordinary impact. The tanker, the Stena Immaculate, had been anchored 12 miles off the coast. It was carrying aviation fuel, which has been spilling into the North Sea.
Solong has collided with tanker Stena Immaculate in the outer anchorage. Both vessels are abandoning.
The first priority was to rescue the crew members and get them back to land.
36 of them were brought safely ashore here at Grimsby. The ambulance service said none of them needed further hospital treatment. But what they're dealing with out at sea is one of the worst maritime collisions in recent British history.
The tanker was carrying aviation fuel on behalf of the US Navy. It was struck by the Solong, a cargo ship which had 15 containers of a toxic compound called sodium cyanide on board. Exposure to it can be serious. It can cause heart or breathing problems and even prove fatal to humans. As the seriousness of the situation emerged, the port authorities stopped all boats leaving the docks along this coastline.
VTS has put a total stop on all sailings. Nobody can get out.
It's very unusual that the shipping's actually ceased. This will cost millions of pounds just in lost revenue for the actual of the ports.
Inside the exclusion zone at sea, lifeboat crews, tugboats and other vessels were all trying to help.
A lot of people watching this would struggle to understand how two big modern vessels can collide like that.
This morning it was dense fog. Ships are on a tight schedule a lot of the time. One ship is answered. All the electronics, what modern ships have, even small boats have a lot of electronics. But somebody's got to be watching the electronics and also looking out the window.
Local leaders here have called on the government to implement a rapid action plan to contain the pollution.
There will need to be some form of clear-up operation. Of course, it's tidal in the Humber, so we have to wait for it to be a high tide to get large vessels back into port. But there will be some really serious concerns about what that will mean for local marine life and the environment more broadly.
Wildlife charities are now waiting to see what impact this has for seabirds, seals and the marine environment. The true impact of this is still not known. Tom Parmenter, Sky News, Grimsby.
Yes, there's very much still a developing story. Let's bring in our Chief North of England correspondent, Greg Milam, who is across events for us this evening and joins us from Grimsby. And Greg, let's talk about the one crew member still unaccounted for, and that was from the Solong vessel.
Yeah, there's been some confusion throughout the day about whether everyone on board those two vessels was accounted for. The vessel's owner, the owner of that cargo ship, the Solong, has said that one of the 14 crew who were aboard that ship is unaccounted for. That tallies with what we knew, that 23 people were aboard the oil tanker. Its operator had said that all of those who were on board that ship had been accounted for and were safe. There were 14 aboard the cargo ship. We know 13 of those fine, checked out by the ambulance service here and not even needing hospital treatment. But that one person unaccounted for, and when you look at those images of the intensity of that fire and, of course, the force of that collision of those two vast vessels 10 miles off coast, is perhaps not surprising that there wasn't some the possibility of human catastrophe in that. And that search and rescue operation is going on. But, of course, we're, nearly 12 hours on from that impact. That job of bringing that fire under control, of course, not helped by the fact that, as we know, some of that jet fuel has been released into the sea. That's what's burning, those chemicals aboard the other ship as well. We know that oil tanker was on contract to the US military, providing jet fuel to the US Navy. That, of course, will all form part of the investigation that will undoubtedly need to take place now about how on earth something like this could happen. You heard there in Tom's report the questions about, with all of the technology on these vessels, how it's possible, when you look at that satellite tracking, that cargo ship could head on a direct course to a ship that was anchored, awaiting the low tide to pass to make its way into the port. So those questions will need to be answered. That will clearly take time. The Marine Accident Investigation Board are here beginning that investigation. And, of course, those questions about the environmental impact. When all of that is dealt with out at sea, what will be the impact on the East Coast and further of any of those chemicals that have been released?
Greg, thank you. Greg Milam in Grimsby for us tonight. Well, let's speak to the leader of Hull City Council. He is Mike Ross. He joins me now. Good of you to join us, Councillor. Just catching up on the developments of the day. It's an ongoing developing situation. What's the latest you can tell us?
Well, I mean, the first thing I want to say, obviously, is my thoughts go to all those who've been involved in this terrible incident, both in terms of those on the vessels and their family, and, of course, a big thank you to all those involved in the incredible rescue operation that's been underway. As you say, we do believe there should be a real clear rescue recovery plan set out by the government. We want to see a rapid response plan set out by them in terms of next steps. This could have major catastrophic implications. It's too early to speculate at this stage exactly what that is, but the plan needs to be put in place quickly to set out exactly how the East Coast is going to recover from this.
Yeah, you don't want speculation, but you do want action. What is it you want from the government? Let's start by what you've had so far, because this happened this morning. What's been happening throughout the course of the day?
Well, obviously, what has been the priority today has been the amazing effort by a whole group of different organisations and agencies in terms of the recovery operation. And that is a whole range of different organisations involved in that. And that has to have been the priority today. What we're saying now is, obviously, when that phase is over, the government needs to be really clear about the rapid response that's going to be put in place on this. And they need to set out exactly what steps they can take to make sure that things like the trade routes can be kept open, the implications in terms of environmental impact could be addressed. All range of different issues are important in this, and they all need to be taken into account in terms of next steps.
Yeah, it's a complicated situation, isn't it? And this isn't going to be over anytime soon. We've seen the shocking, dramatic pictures. We talk about the impact on the environment, but also the impact on trade as well. The North Sea, a hugely busy area for traffic. And in our first report, those affected saying this exclusion zone is having quite the impact already. What is it you understand the impact of that will be, of having that area of sea, not just because of burning vessels, but because of the toxic chemicals that have been put into the sea? What do you understand about the situation about when that may be reopen again?
Well, I mean, I think really at this stage it's too early to really know on that respect. But undoubtedly, the Humber ports is one of the busiest in the country, and a lot of the trade for not just this region but the whole country comes through those ports. So it needs to be able to operate quickly, but likewise needs to be able to operate safely. I think that's going to be paramount for a lot of people. This has been obviously a major disaster that's taken place here, and all steps need to be taken to put it right.
Yeah, safety paramount. Obviously, as the local councillor, this is a shocking event to happen. You know, we're looking at the scenes from earlier today, just 10 miles off the East Yorkshire coast. What's the reaction been locally to what's unfolded?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of shock and concern around this. I've had people get in contact with me, a lot of people reach out, and just in terms of expressing their views and concerns, I think undoubtedly something so close to Sarah is a concern, and both in terms of both the impact, but also the people involved, and obviously the East Yorkshire coast is one that we want to see protected and encouraged and be supported. So anything like this that might put people off and actually might put it at risk is a real concern for the local community.
Yeah, I'm going to talk to a conservationist a little later this hour about the environmental impact, and immediately you think about the chemicals and the jet fuel going into the North Sea, and you think about the wildlife, you think about the shoreline, you think about the water, but it's also the air pollution from those burning vessels and what comes to settle on the ground as well. How are you reassuring local residents?
Well, really, I mean, I think this is one of the important things. There does need to be a major effort to reassure local people, but yeah, local people need to know that it is safe as well. So we need to quickly hear in terms of next steps on this. I have no doubt that every effort can be made to make it safe, but we need to see that clear plan coming very quickly. This is a beautiful coastline, and we want to make sure it's protected. And no doubt there's going to be a lot of work needed to make that be the case, and it really needs to be set out very quickly what that work looks like.
Yeah, who do you want from the government to come up and visit the area and have a look at what's going on? Because, you know, you've got to see it to believe it, right?
Oh, quite. And, you know, I think this is of such significance. I would say that certainly the Prime Minister or the Transport Secretary need to be in the area very soon, just to reassure the local community around the steps the government is taking. Yeah,
Councillor Mike Ross, leader of Hull City Council, thank you very much for joining us on the UK Tonight. Well, marine traffic websites indicate that the container ship, the Solong, hit the Stena Immaculate while the oil tanker was anchored and stationary in the North Sea. Our data and forensics correspondent Tom Cheshire has been taking a look at how this collision happened.
Thousands and thousands of miles of sea all around, yet two ships in a direct and fiery collision. Here's what we know about the ships in the moments up to and immediately after the crash. Now, the Coast Guard said the alarm went at 9:48. It was sounded the site of the collision in the North Sea, 13 miles off the coast of Yorkshire. One of the ships, the Stena Immaculate, was anchored at the time, meaning it was stationary after sailing from Greece, according to ship tracking site Vessel Finder. The cargo vessel, Solong, was sailing from Grangemouth in Scotland to Rotterdam in the Netherlands at a speed of 16 knots, around 18 miles an hour, on a direct collision course with the Immaculate. Now, both ships have radar systems, which means they should have been able to detect each other at a distance of 24 miles out, experts have told us. And at 10 miles away, nautical miles away, the vessels should have been visible, although there were reports of fog and haze this morning.
If it's been put on autopilot and there's nobody on the bridge, which could happen, then it would just keep going straight on. It's, you know, and that's what happens with a lot of the vessels. They have autopilot and it just steers the course. They don't deviate. They don't have any. There's no bends in the sea. It just goes straight. It just goes straight for miles, hundreds of miles.
Now, Solong is a Portuguese-flagged cargo vessel, 140 metres long, with a gross tonnage of 7,852. That's a measure of its volume. Put it in perspective, the tanker, Stena Immaculate, is, or was, much bigger, 183 metres long, with a gross tonnage of nearly 30,000. Now, it was carrying jet fuel, and that ignited, so much so that it was visible from space. This is a satellite image taken at the same time with a huge plume of smoke, clearly identifiable. At 10:20 a.m, the Coast Guard tasked a number of lifeboats to support its response. Several lifeboats, a Coast Guard rescue helicopter, were dispatched to the scene in the North Sea, along with a plane and nearby vessels with firefighting capability. Now, all that quick action meant the entire tanker crew was taken ashore safely. But the Marine Accident Investigation Branch has already sent investigators to Grimsby to understand why one ship apparently ploughed into another.
Tom Cheshire there with that look at the data we have on the collision. Let's bring in now Secretary General of the International Chamber of Shipping, Guy Platten. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme tonight. I just want to get your perspective on just how unusual this is. Tom was taking us through the the geography of the North Sea and the shipping line and the speed at which those vessels operate. And as he said there, thousands of miles of sea, and one vessel seemingly crashes into one that's stationary.
Yeah, good evening. Yeah, firstly, my hearts go out to the families, the crews involved, and the crew as well, and also particularly disturbing to hear that a crew member is still missing from the Salon, I believe it is. So let's really hope for a positive outcome for that. Also, for the rescue services, the Royal National Life Institution, HM Coast Guard, they obviously did a first-class job in reacting to this incident. These things are unusual. They don't happen very often. There's thousands of ship movements every single day of the year. So we need to find out exactly what happened, which is why the UK's got great investigatory capability through the Marine Accident Investigation Branch. Each ship will have its own voice data recorder, it'll have its like their own black box. So the investigators will look to try and piece together exactly what happened. But this is a highly unusual occurrence, and we just need to find out and allow the investigation to take place to really understand what caused this.
Yeah, as you said, it's early days and you don't want speculation, but in our first report tonight, our national correspondent spoke to somebody who operates in that port a lot and said, you know, look, on these ships there's lots of gadgets and technology, but there was a lot of fog this morning, and you also need to look out the window as well. So these vessels are high tech, but they rely on the people operating them to do the basics as well. Is that fair to say you can't just rely on tech on these ships? You literally have to look out the window.
Absolutely not. You know, every ship has to comply and have a look out at all times. They're there. So that's why I think it's really important that we get to the bottom of what actually happened here. It's very difficult to speculate, but they have got high-tech systems on board. They've also got a human interface as well. We just need to. So, but you know, when we can learn from this going forward, that's the most important thing of all. But I think still my heart goes out to the family of the crew member who's missing. I think that's the priority as well, to try and locate that individual.
Yeah, very much so. Just looking again at those shocking images from this morning of both vessels on fire. You know the RNLI really well. You're an inspector of lifeboats for the RNLI. You're a deck officer in the Merchant Navy. You know, you've worked with the Ministry of Defence. How difficult would that operation have been, just looking at those pictures?
You can see it's been an incredible challenging situation for the lifeboat crews, but as you say, I used to work for the RNLI. I don't know the bravery and the commitment and the dedication of the crew members involved, so I'm sure they answered the call straight away, and they're faced with unusual circumstances, and I'm sure they reacted brilliantly, as we hear, with so many crew members brought off so quickly from the ship. So you know, I can only pay testament to the work of the RNLI and the work of HM Coast Guard. And I think we should be proud as the UK how it can react to these incidents so quickly and so effectively.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on the environmental impact? Because a lot of people concerned tonight about toxic chemicals going into the sea, jet fuel, you know, you see the huge plumes of black smoke going into the air. How concerned are you about the environmental impact of what's happened? Like you said, these are rare, but they're devastating for local coastlines when they do happen. I'm
no expert in these matters, but you can see the jet fuel has got a light fuel. Hopefully that will break up quite quickly by the sea motion. If it's still a toxic effect, we don't know the effect of these containers, which are being reported full of dangerous chemicals as well. So I think we need to take the view of the experts, but hopefully once they can extinguish the fires, once they can assess the situation, we'll have a much better understanding about the environmental impact, which hopefully will not be for too long. And the knock-on effect for the shipping industry, obviously you talk about the investigation, that will be forthcoming, answers will be needed so this doesn't happen again, lessons learned, as you said. But also that area, that important busy route for shipping is now a zone of exclusion for the foreseeable. What's the knock-on effect of that? Well, clearly the biggest effect will be for the port of Hull, which will be closed for the time being. You know, ships will have to reroute to other places. This will ultimately be a temporary closure of the port. So I think it's a temporary sort of thing at the moment, which we then, once we take stock, once we see what's going on, we can then reassess the situation then. But I think most importantly is to keep the search and rescue efforts going. and to look and think of the crew members involved, and to give our faith in the Marine Accident Investigation Branch, who will conduct a very thorough investigation into what happened here.
Guy Platten, Secretary-General of the International Chamber of Shipping. Good to have your expertise on the programme this evening. Thank you for your time. Well, we're going to have more on the potential environmental impact of today's collision in the North Sea coming up a little later in the programme.
Over there, to your left. There have been airstrikes every day. Hezbollah are very sensitive about us showing any pictures, and we're being hurried away right now.
It felt akin to riding into some sort of Armageddon.
Many other areas have been hit badly. There are shells coming in every few minutes. Hear that whistle and that crunch? We know that they're coming from the south of the city, where there's a column of Russian armoury. I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
It's trying to hit us. That's it. It got us then.
There's a lot of action going on, a lot of hits coming in still.
We were the first journalists and the only outsiders to reach the site of the attack several weeks after it happened.
We found from the missile.
It's very difficult to see what around here could be conceived of as a legitimate military target.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, a boat seriously overcrowded.
This is one of the most severe viruses in the world. Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at that sheet of flames, and that has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa!
Getting up close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
Sky News get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Let's stay with our top story now, and that dramatic collision in the North Sea this morning. Wildlife charities worried about the potential devastating impact of jet fuel leaking from the tanker into the ocean and subsequently the Humber estuary. Local environmental groups are reportedly meeting tonight to discuss their response to the incident. Our science correspondent Thomas Moore joins me now from Grimsby. So, Thomas, two vessels, both carrying two different substances, both harmful for the environment. Can you tell us more about them?
Yeah, so there are a series of risks that from the substances on board these two ships. First of all, the jet fuel, of course. Now, that's kerosene, relatively light oil, and it does tend to sit on the surface. We've seen from the pictures, a lot of that will be burning off already. Others, bits of it will be degraded in the water by bacteria and also dispersed by the action of wave and wind. But there is also concern about the heavy fuel oil, a much thicker, stickier, tarry-like oil that powers the ships, but it can also smother the fur and the feathers of local wildlife. And the other risk, of course, is these containers of sodium cyanide. We still don't know whether those containers are intact after this inferno that has engulfed the ships, and that will be a big concern because that is extremely toxic to marine life because it does suck the oxygen out of the water and is toxic on contact too. So this is extremely worrying, and of course there are other aspects. We don't really know what else is in the containers that were on that cargo ship.
Yeah, much more to come. This is still very much a developing story. It only happened this morning, and it's on a large scale. Let's go back to the danger posed to local wildlife, and we're going to be exploring that in a bit more detail at the moment. But what are the initial concerns?
So there's two aspects. One is this is the largest lobster fishery in Europe. Now, you've got a lot of fishers who are this evening being contained in port. They can't leave, but they will be worried about what they will find when they can go out there once again. Now, of course, if this is oil which is sitting on the surface, that shouldn't pose a danger to anything that's on the sea bottom. But, of course, these are people that need to get it up through that thin layer of oil to the surface. So they will have to wait until that does disperse. The other aspect, though, is to the wildlife. There are it's a big population of grey seals that are still raising their young, which they've had over winter. You've got huge colonies of gannets, kittiwakes, puffins and so on, all along the cliffs on this east coast. And they, of course, feed out at sea in the very area where this chemical oil spill is. So there will be a lot of concern. They are on standby tonight. They can muster something like 800 volunteers if this oil does start to come ashore and damage wildlife, because speed really is essential in those circumstances, because if it is the really thick marine oil, that can really smother wildlife and it will lead to many deaths.
Thomas, thank you. Thomas Moore, live for us in Grimsby tonight. Let's speak now to Executive Director of Oceana UK, Hugo Taghone. He joins us on the programme now. Hugo, good of you to join us. Thank you so much. Your initial reaction to what has happened, we understand it is unusual, but it can have devastating consequences.
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen the shocking images of the burning jet fuel on the ocean surface, the devastated boats containing all of those toxins, the aviation fuel, the potential heavy fuel from the boats, the sodium cyanide, all very toxic to marine wildlife. And this tragic accident has happened very close to some of the UK's marine protected areas, marine sanctuaries there to protect our wildlife, the Holderness Offshore Marine Protected Area and the southern North Sea special area of conservation, which is particularly important for harbour porpoises, which obviously come to the surface to breathe, could come into contact with the aviation fuel and other heavy fuel if it does leak into the sea. So this is a real concern. We don't know the extent of the slick yet and what has escaped into the ocean, but of course very close to not only those grey seals we heard about and the seabird colonies, but many other important marine species in our seas. Yeah, your organisation, fights for UK seas to get the protection they deserve, because let's face it, they get a bit of a rough time of it, don't they? And this just feeds into that. But I know that you look for spills, and they happen more often than we might think. Yeah, this example, of course, is a rarity now. These types of tanker spills. They used to be, much more frequent in our ocean. People will remember in living memory some of the big oil spills, the Brer oil disaster, for example, up in Shetland, which caused so much devastation to seal populations, to local seafood, important fish species, and other things. But now we're tracking and monitoring regular or chronic oil spills from oil rigs themselves. This is something that happens week in, week out in our seas, releasing oil and other chemicals into our important marine areas. So this is something that Oceana is particularly concerned about, regular oil spills and, of course, catastrophic oil spills like today, something that can devastate our marine protected areas and devastate the wildlife which should be thriving in our seas without the risk of oil spills.
I mean, there's all this talk about a cleanup operation. What does that look like, and just how easy is it? We know that there's been jet fuel released into the water. There's also been sodium, I forget the name of it now. Sodium cyanide, that's it. Sodium cyanide, a highly toxic chemical released into the water. So how do you go about cleaning that up?
Look, it's of course not Oceana's job to clean up the the devastation caused by this accident. And we don't know how much has escaped into the environment yet. The challenge will be that some of it could end up in sediment and persist for a long time in that sediment, causing long-term damage to the marine environment. Some of it will burn off, of course, causing other types of toxins. We're going to have to assess that that scale of damage, as the fires are put out, and we see the extent of the slicks and the spills, and hopefully, let's hope that much thicker fuel in the oil in the ships is contained within the ships and doesn't leak out into the environment. But there'll be a combination of efforts. We've got a team going up to assess on the coastline with local stakeholders if, as and when that oil does arrive on the coastline, and we'll see what happens. People are familiar. This is one of the shocking things people do recollect from oil spills: tarred birds in the shoreline, marine life covered in oil, the sorts of tragic images that we've seen not just in the UK historically, but around the world as and when oil spills occur in our ocean, something that we want to consign to the past by moving away from our dependence on oil and fossil fuels.
Yeah, it's the army of volunteers that's swinging to action, isn't it, when it comes to the impact on wildlife? But I think it's important to reflect on any danger to human health as well, because a lot of people, particularly on the East Yorkshire coast, will be concerned about that because, once the world has moved on from the spill, what is the legacy? What could be the damage to their health?
Absolutely. Well, look, people shouldn't be coming, into contact with kerosene, the jet fuel, or any other type of, oil products. And the whole of the UK coastline, including along the northeast coast, is a beautiful part of our country. Something that, of course, a part of the country that people depend on for their health and well-being, for tourism, for local jobs. So this isn't just about human health. This is about the health of our coastal communities. This is about the health of our coastal economy. This is about the health of those local towns and villages that depend on a clean ocean environment and clean beaches. So we really are hoping that this doesn't wash up on our beaches and cause devastation, not just to those people, but also to those local places and communities.
Yeah, it's the age-old problem for coastlines, isn't it, in the UK, balancing the needs of shipping traffic with the local environment. Hugo, really good to talk to you. Hugo Taghome, their Executive Director of Oceana UK, fighting for UK seas to get the protection they deserve. Good to talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come on the UK tonight, we'll discuss the shipping lanes around the UK and look at why these ships may have come together this morning with such devastating consequences. Let's get more now on tonight's top story. One person still missing after a cargo ship collided with an oil tanker in the North Sea. One of the vessels was carrying jet fuel, the other carrying a highly toxic chemical, with growing fears about the environmental impact of this collision. Well, I'm joined now by the editor of magazine Shipping Today and Yesterday, Nigel Lawrence. Nigel, really good to have you on the programme tonight. I wonder if you could provide a bit of context for us. We hear that this is unusual. We don't hear about these kind of collisions every day, but that particular stretch of the North Sea, 10 miles off the East Yorkshire coast, just how busy is that?
It's a busy shipping lane, no question about it, in particular ships that have to anchor and wait for the high tides to get into the ports of Hull and Immingham. But this should not have happened. When two ships collide at sea, there's usually one of two reasons. There's human error or machine instrument failure. Now, we know that the Stena Immaculate wasn't responsible for either of those, as it was stationary. So the fault obviously lies with the Solong. Machine failure looks very unlikely. The ship was going in a straight line for a long period at quite a high speed, considering the area it was in. It was doing just over 16 knots, which in an area where there's a lot of ships anchored is a bit risky. And one can only conjecture that it may have been on autopilot. The visibility wasn't good, but it certainly shouldn't have been a problem.
In terms of the collision, just looking at that map, it looked like there were quite a few vessels, as you said, anchored, waiting for the tide to be able to come into the port. Is that quite usual for so many to be anchored and for other vessels to sail around them?
Oh, yes, that is a very regular thing, not just off the Humber, but in other parts of the country as well. And it's not just the anchored ships. There's an awful lot of smaller vessels taking wind farm crews out. There's oil rig support vessels. There's a lot of shipping in that area.
And they'll be used to operating like that. I just wonder, you know, like you said, there's technology on board, but also humans on board operating. The two operate in tandem to make the voyage safe. If there was a problem spotted by one vessel moving towards the other, how difficult is it to stop that course?
Well, as long as you realise the problem when there's a reasonable distance between the two ships, then no problem at all. And that should have been evident. The equipment on the ships these days is very highly technical, and it should have been flagging up a warning that that ship was in their path. One might assume that it was on autopilot. I don't know. We'll have to wait until we get the full inquiry report.
What about speed limits? As you said, you felt that the vessel was travelling too fast. Are there speed limits in place in waters like that?
No, they're not, and I wouldn't like to see it. I think you've got to leave it to experienced captains and crew to go at whatever speed they think is safe. But there's obviously a bit of misjudgment in this case.
There's going to be a comprehensive inquiry in the coming days and weeks to find out what happened, to make sure it doesn't happen again, lessons learned and so forth. But in terms of how the industry will take this, how shipping will take this, was this just be seen as a one-off or something of particular concern?
Well, the inquiry will throw up all sorts of things, and there may be some elements that they want to take further after the inquiry is done. But it is such a very rare occurrence.
Yeah. Are the safety standards in this industry up to scratch?
Yes, they certainly are. The SOLAS regulations are very strict. And both ships were in very good condition.
But such was the speed that obviously both are damaged, and the spill now, the fallout of that's going to take some time to come to terms with.
Yes, it certainly is. I mean, the environmental fallout is dreadful. particularly if the containers on the container ship have burst and you get the sodium cyanide in the water. That's very soluble chemical, and it turns into hydrogen cyanide, which is deadly poisonous to the marine life and a danger to humans as well.
When these things do happen, you know, how much do those companies involved in these, we could call it an environmental disaster, how much they contribute to the cleanup?
Well, they will all be insured, and the insurance companies are going to get a very big bill on this. I mean, we're not just talking millions, we could be talking £1 billion to sort this out. And of course, the loss of 2 ships, very unlikely that either will be repaired and sail again, and all the cargo that was on board.
So we're looking at a huge bill, costly every way you look. Thank you so much for joining us. That's Nigel Lawrence, the editor of Shipping Today and Yesterday. Really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Pleasure.
So Keir Starmer is going to face his first by-election since becoming Prime Minister. This is after former Labour MP Mike Amesbury announced that he is standing down. You may remember Mr Amesbury was given a 10-week suspended sentence after punching a constituent. Our political correspondent Rob Powell joins us now. So first by-election, is worth reminding people what this means.
Yeah, this means that Labour will have to find another candidate for this seat in Cheshire and Runcorn and Helsby, but it also means that Reform, who have been licking their lips over the prospect of a by-election here, will be throwing everything at this. If we remind ourselves how this came about, Mike Amesbury pleaded guilty earlier this year after he was found to have punched a constituent. There was footage that emerged, CCTV footage that you can see there of him punching Paul Fellows, the gentleman that's being hit, to the head, knocking him to the ground, and then following him onto the road and punching him again at least 5 times. Now, he pleaded guilty, was eventually given a suspended sentence. He was suspended from the Labour Party, so he wasn't sitting as a Labour MP. But the fact that he got a custodial sentence, even though it was a suspended one, means that it sets a process in train that eventually probably would have led to him losing the seat anyway. That's because it would have triggered a recall petition, which would have almost certainly led to a by-election in which he could have stood, but he wouldn't have been able to stand as the Labour candidate, so he would have likely have lost there. So I think the calculation here from Mike Amesbury is essentially to stand aside now at the earliest possible opportunity rather than let that protracted process drag on. He said that he regrets every day what he did in that video, the punch and the assault, and he says that if he was to have been given a lighter sentence, then he would have tried to have essentially stayed as an MP. He believes it's his calling, and having only been re-elected 7 or 8 months ago, he believed he could have hung on. So I think that makes it quite clear that the reason he's going is because there was a chance that he probably would have been pushed out anyway. As I say, Reform will be throwing everything at this. I think for Labour and for Keir Starmer, it'll be a nightmare if they do lose this to Reform, because I think it just adds to that narrative of Nigel Farage's party on the march. What I would say, though, is given all of the quite extraordinary polling numbers that Reform have been pulling in and some of the quite extraordinary ambitions and statements being put out by Reform, this is quite crucial for them as well. If they're seen to underperform, that might be the moment where people start to question actually whether the Reform phenomenon and the Nigel Farage phenomenon is as big as people are making out.
OK, Rob, thank you. Rob Powell with the latest there from Westminster. Still to come on the UK tonight, the King reveals his favourite songs to mark Commonwealth Day. We'll take a look at his playlist. And Manchester United's co-owner Sir Jim Ratcliffe reveals his regret at not having sacked Erik ten Hag sooner, but gives his full support to Ruben Amorim.
I want to start the programme today with a name, a story that I can't get out of my head. The campaign has now started. This is your chance. Tell people. This is the Politics Hub. It's not correct. The tax burden is projected to go up.
No, I am talking about...
No, but I'm not. This is my interview. Look, this is ridiculous.
No one does care about us.
I'm really interested in that. On the Politics Hub, we like to push the boundaries. He's got the majority. The question is, what is he going to do with it?
Mayhem in the Middle East, rippling in America's West.
Get back! Get
The resolve of these protesters is now being seriously tested. I saw police being forced or pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests.
None of this is a peaceful protest.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. How are you feeling?
I am angry. It is an anti-woman agenda.
Sky News, get the full story first. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support, but it's nasty out there.
Can you beat Donald Trump, Governor? President Biden, do you trust President Xi? President Biden says that this meeting went well. He said real progress was made on a whole host of issues. Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
There's no doubt that Kamala Harris and her team are harnessing the power of social media. Do you think Kamala is brat?
Kamala's brat.
Are you scared?
Yeah, we were scared. It was terrible. Strong wind, building tearing down.
As them say, God works, so we can't do nothing.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. Free, wherever you get your news.
Excited. I've had severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
Welcome back. Coming up, we'll take a look and a listen to the King's favourite songs as he shares his playlist for Commonwealth Day. But first, Sir Jim Ratcliffe has admitted that he personally got it wrong when he decided not to sack Eric Ten Hag in the summer. The Manchester United co-owner has declined to speak to Sky News. He was instead speaking to Gary Neville. The full interview on his YouTube channel. The Sky Sports pundit has been working with Ineos and Manchester United on plans for the club's future, including a new stadium.
It's quite difficult to, I couldn't. It was quite difficult to extract in that season when we arrived Eric's performance from the structure around him, because obviously the structure around him now is completely different. Yeah. So if I look today, there's a really strong relationship and a really strong support culture for Ruben with Jason. So Jason and Ruben talk to each other 2 or 3 times a day. Omar speaks to Ruben every day. Every time I go to the match, I speak to Ruben. So, there's a support structure there, and he's got his coaches and the physios and the doctor and everything else. But it was quite difficult to see whether, what environment Eric was operating in. Was it, in other words, was the erratic performance a function of Eric, or was it a function of the organisation? And we couldn't really get to the bottom of answering that question with sort of certainty, I suppose. We gave Eric the benefit of the doubt.
And you regret that, or do you feel?
Yeah, it was the wrong decision. We made the wrong decision. It was an error. I suppose in that sense I regret it. I think there was some extenuating or mitigating circumstances in having made that decision, but at the end of the day, it was the wrong decision. So, hands up, mea culpa on that one. Yeah.
How do you assess Ruben's first 4 or 5 months? It's also been tough in terms of results and performances, but how do you assess? He's very honest.
Yeah, he is honest, and I like that about him. I think Ruben has done an excellent job. I really like Ruben, and I think in the circumstances in which he arrived mid-season. Yeah. He didn't have time to train his players in the way in which he wants to play. He inherited a squad which he's had no influence on, and the squad isn't necessarily designed for the way in which he plays football. And English isn't his natural language, and he's never played in the Premier League before, and he's managing the biggest club in the world, and it's a tough place. Manchester United is a tough place.
And he's young.
There's a big one. And he's a young guy, yeah. So I think, if you take all of that into consideration, I think he's done a remarkably good job. If I look at the salary bill of the squad that's available to him, that salary bill is not the salary bill of Manchester City or Liverpool.
Do you mean because of the injuries? What do you mean? What are you referring to the actual?
If you look at the salary bill of the players that are available to him that are not injured or not out on loan, Because we've got Anthony out on loan, we've got Sancho out on loan, we've got Rashford out on loan, we've got Mason Mount hasn't really played in the last 2 seasons, we've got Luke Shaw hasn't played in the last 2 seasons. So if you modify our salary bill for the players that are not available to Ruben, then our salary bill ranks us about, mid-league, second half of the table.
Well, a pretty candid interview with Sir Jim Ratcliffe there, speaking to Sky Sports pundit Gary Neville. Dave Fulton is here with me. And Dave, this interview is quite interesting in terms of the timing, because it comes just a day after all those protests.
Yeah, so Jim Ratcliffe's spoken to numerous people today, including Gary Neville, who's spoken to the BBC and lots of written journalists as well. And he has been very candid and pretty honest. Good opportunity to put his side of things across. He's come under quite a lot of criticism, as of Ineos, for the cuts, the redundancies, the trying to save money. He said that if they'd have carried on the way they were, they would have been running out of money by Christmas of this year.
So
they would have been bankrupt, and this is Manchester United. Yeah, so he's had to make those decisions, some tough decisions. He put his hand up to a couple of things, the signing of Dan Ashworth from Newcastle, the technical director. That didn't work. He said that they should have got rid of Erik ten Hag in the summer. They kept him going, so he said that mistakes have been made, but he also was pretty upbeat. I think he said here that in 3 years' time, the most profitable club in the world he wants them to be, with the most iconic football stadium, plans to be announced on that, and finishing up winning silverware again. So he kind of ended on a positive note, but yeah, lots of work to do still.
It's almost like short-term pain for long-term gain. He even says of Ruben Amorim, like you said, he's been talking to the written press as well. He spoke to the Times saying, Amorim is not perfect, but he's our guy and he's doing a great job. He's quite a ruthless character, isn't he, Sir Jim Ratcliffe? Yeah. And as you said, those new stadium plans are coming. It's almost like his vision of Manchester United is in the future. It's not now. All this stuff is happening now, but he's got big plans. What do we know about what they are at this stage? Like you said, more to come on Tuesday.
The plans? Well, the stadium is, we're going to find out a lot more about that on Tuesday. And I think what he also did, he took the opportunity to say, look, a lot of these players that we've inherited. I think he name-checks Jadon Sancho, Rasmus Højlund, Anthony, Casemiro, Andre Onana, guys that were there before. Massive
naming and
money.
shaming.
Yeah, a little bit, saying that some of them are not good enough, some of them are overpaid, so he's quite punchy on occasions, but that he's inherited a lot of this. He hasn't been in the job that long, but you're right, it's very much short-term pain, but the vision is very positive. He's invested 1.3 billion for the 29% of the club. So he's in charge of football operations, but he's not the majority stake holder. But yeah, he's got a lot of work to do. But it'd be fascinating to see what happens. That's Sir Jim Ratcliffe, not the only story in town football-wise, because the Monday Night Football is with us as well.
Staying connected is vital for business. Sky Business sponsors this report.
When he came back to Tottenham as an Arsenal player, the crowd were unbelievably abusive towards him.
It was very intense. You could cut the atmosphere. You could just feel it was different.
Sol Campbell comes out to face the music, and you'd be forgiven for thinking that this North London derby revolved around just one man.
Back then, there was no support. People were just allowed to just carry on in a disgraceful way.
Sol is a sensitive human being, so obviously he felt it, but he didn't show it.
Obviously he's a great player, and obviously all the managers were desperate to keep him on the books.
The world was his oyster.
He was become one of the best players that Spurs had ever had in that position. Fans absolutely adored him.
Campbell's star is still very much in the ascendancy. At international level, he returned from the World Cup with a greatly enhanced reputation. He's a player.
Sky Business sponsors this report.
Now, from disco to Afro beats, the King has shared a playlist of his favourite records to mark Commonwealth Day. King Charles revealed his eclectic taste in tunes as part of a new Apple Music show recorded in Buckingham Palace. The monarch turning DJ to speak about his personal memories of meeting some of the world's biggest stars and revealing the impact that music has had on his life. And you might be a little surprised by some of the entries.
Kylie Minogue came to St James's Palace to perform this song in 2012 in advance of the Diamond Jubilee visit to Australia. We had a large reception for Australians in the United Kingdom, and as Kylie is an ambassador for My Now King's Trust, she very generously agreed to come and perform. The song is The Locomotion, and this is music for dancing. Again, it has that infectious energy which makes it, I find, incredibly hard to sit still.
Time for a quick look at the weather now.
The ideal atmosphere, whatever the altitude. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, one of the King's choices was Hot, Hot, Hot by Arrow. Not much of that around, I'm afraid. There's a developing northerly wind that's going to make it much colder over the next few days, wintry showers and widespread overnight frosts. Northern and central parts looking fine if windy this evening, bar the odd coastal shower in the north, while the south is going to be cloudy with some mainly light, showery outbreaks. Patchy rain will continue there for a time tonight, mainly over southwestern England, drying up later. Most other places dry and clear, with an extensive frost developing over northern and central parts as the winds ease up. Tomorrow morning, sunny spells and a scattering of showers, with the showers mainly in the north and the east, and wintry on northern hills.
The perfect climate, whatever the forecast. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
That's all from the UK tonight. We're back tomorrow night at 8. Next up, it's Gillian Joseph with The World. We'll see you tomorrow.